obligated to produce a certain amount of urine, because if we don't, we can't then deliver all of those metabolic wastes to the bladder. So we need water to carry those metabolic wastes to the bladder. That's obligatory urine. And that's not a very large amount of urine, but we must produce some urine to get rid of those metabolic wastes. And then the rest of the urine that we produce is referred to as facultative urine. That is over and above what we need, absolutely need, to move those metabolic wastes out of the body. And how do we regulate that water? Well, we've already talked about a lot of this in past discussions. You might remember that we have a hypothalamus, and that hypothalamus has receptors, and the hypothalamus can tell when you're dehydrated. And when you're dehydrated, the hypothalamus then says you're thirsty, your blood osmolarity is low, you need to get water, you need to get water in the system, your blood pressure is low. And so what does that mean? That means that when you are dehydrated, then your hypothalamus says drink water, and it also directs your posterior pituitary to release what hormone?
ADH.
ADH, right. So that ADH is going to help your kidneys to reabsorb more water. Your thirst signal is going to tell you to drink water so that you get rehydrated. This drinking of water is not so simple. Yeah, you can take a few sips and be satisfied. I do that like all night long. Take 2-3 sips and then go back to sleep and then make up later and take some more. But to really satisfy, to really rehydrate the blood, you need to fill your stomach. So a full glass of water is really desirable in this case. Sure, you can moisten your mouth, and it takes care of the short-term desire for water, but you need to fill your stomach to take care of the long-term and to rehydrate your blood. We also had in the kidney the release of renin. Renin is released by where?
Granular cells.
Granular cells, and what does renin do?
Increase blood pressure.
How?
By
Activates.
blood volume.
By increasing blood volume. How else?
Activates into
Okay,
Vasoconstriction overall, and then there's one other thing from the adrenals. You get input from
Jensen 1, 2? No.
aldosterone.
aldosterone.
Oh. Okay, completely off.
Begins with an A. Aldosterone. Aldosterone. Remember, aldosterone influences the kidneys' ascending limb, the thick part of the ascending limb, to actively move sodium and chloride from the tubular fluid back to the blood. And that draws water out from the thin descending loop. And that adds water to the system. Remember all that? Yep. So all of those mechanisms, your juxtaglomerular apparatus, we didn't talk about these yet. Hypothalamus has your osmoreceptors, and then we have these baroreceptors in the carotid and aortic sinuses. Maybe you remember them from 232, where the carotid splits, you have two sinuses, and the aorta has sinuses. And how are you going to remember that the carotid and aortic sinuses have to do with pressure? Because barometers measure pressure. That's how you're going to measure that one. They detect that stretch or not. So, regulation of our fluid has to do with so many different aspects, but it all starts with being dehydrated, not enough water in the system. We talked about vasoconstriction, we talked about aldosterone, and how long does it take? Look, it takes a significant amount of time for that water to move from the stomach into the system to rehydrate your blood. All of it, of course, is very important for making sure that you stay hydrated. So, regulating urine fluid output, urination, we already know how urine is formed. Urine is formed in the kidneys. And of course, it's going to be dependent on how much water is already in the system. If you have plenty of water in the system, then it's not a big deal. Then you can produce a dilute urine. If you have very little water in the system, then you are going to produce a very concentrated urine. And the more concentrated, the more likely is that you've been dehydrated. And then you can grow kidney stones because you're not flushing things out. We know that we have some neural mechanisms, and that has to do with these arterioles that are either dilated or restricted, constricted. And the glomerular filtration rate is going to be impacted by that. So back to that renin. Renin causes vasoconstriction. If you constrict your glomerulus, That's gonna slow the glomerular filtration rate. It's gonna slow the flow of water through the system, maybe able to recoup more of it, or maybe it gets too stodgy if you're really dehydrated. Yeah. And we already know that our sympathetic impulses, sympathetic system is going to increase renin secretion, because renin secretion then is going to slow the flow so that we recoup. Parasympathetic, what's parasympathetic about?
Rest and digest.
Producing urine, right? Rest and digest. So parasympathetic is all about producing urine, but the sympathetic system is going to prevent us from producing urine because you don't want to have to pee when you're running away. Right? That's the way I always think about it. Don't want to have to pee when you're involved. So we're familiar with the juxtaglomerular apparatus and how it is detecting changes in blood pressure because of the afferent arteriole and the fact that renin is stimulated to be released. And your macula densa also helps with that regard, right? Macula densa sends information to the juxtaglomerular apparatus, and so renin is produced. And renin is going to result in, we didn't mention this, right? But you did. Angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is going to cause the vasoconstriction. Your aldosterone is going to cause that increase in take-up of sodium and chloride, thus water. And your ADH secretion is going to mean that we recoup our water from the collecting ducts and the distal convoluted tubule. What are the names of the cells that produce that ADH? Or that release the ADH, that release the aquaporins, not the ADH? What are the name of the cells in the collecting duct and the distal convoluted tubule that?
Principal cells?
Principal cells, yes. They have the little vacuoles with the porons, the aquaporins inside that they can plug into the walls. Good. ANP and BNP counter these guys. How do they counter it?
Can you repeat that?
ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide, and brain natriuretic peptide, they counter the effects of renin, aldosterone, and ADH.
Decrease blood pressure.
How? Where do they come from?
The atria, the heart.
From the atria of the heart, and BNP from the ventricles of the heart. And here's your reasoning. Regulate saltwater balance and blood pressure by promoting renal sodium and water retention. So instead of getting sodium back into the blood, we want to flush that sodium chloride out, and water follows. And when we remove water from the system, then we can lower blood pressure. Because these guys are stimulated by high blood pressure. When your atria is stretched, because you have hypertension, then you can release that pressure by getting rid of sodium and chloride. Sodium chloride is everything. And this is just the opposite of what that was talking about up there. Just the opposite. We have mechanisms by which we can manage our volume, but sometimes these things go awry. And sometimes we have something referred to as hypovolemia. And hypovolemia is when our isotonic fluid loss is greater than our isotonic fluid gain. Hypovolemia, low volume. And isotonic means that we're talking about solutes and water imbalance. So when we have isotonic loss, then we have hypovolemia. Things that can result in hypotonic or hypovolemia is when you vomit, which of course you're vomiting electrolytes and water. When you have diarrhea, you are defecating electrolytes and water. When you have third-degree burns, remember from 231 talking about burns, first degree just through the epidermis, second degree to the dermis, third degree below the dermis, where you now have muscle exposed. And you don't have anything to protect those tissues from water evaporating, literally leaving the body that way. So that can lead to hypovolemia. Hemorrhage makes total sense. You're losing blood, you're losing blood volume, you're losing water because blood is water-based. Oh, aldosterone hyposecretion, what about that? So if you're not producing aldosterone, because you have Addison's disease, if you're not producing aldosterone, then what happens in your ascending limb?
No sodium reabsorption.
No sodium and chloride reabsorption, and therefore no water reabsorption. Isotonic loss. The flip side of the hypovolemia is hypervolemia. Hypervolemia hypervolemia as increase in fluid gain, isotonic fluid gain. Isotonic fluid loss is reduced because maybe your kidneys aren't functioning properly. They're not filtering well. They're not recuperating water. They're not reabsorbing the materials that we want to reabsorb. Kidney failure or hypersecretion of aldosterone. Imagine, hypersecretion of aldosterone means that you're drinking over and above the amount of sodium and chloride and hence water, which is going to lead to hypertension. Clearly leads to hypertension. Yeah. What else? This primary aldosteronism or hypersecretion of aldosterone would mean that your adrenal glands are also impacted because that means that they're producing more of the hormone that we don't necessarily need at the time. Maybe you have tumors, or as it says, maybe it's even an inherited condition. So hypovolemia, loss of isotonic fluid, hypervolemia, retention of too much isotonic fluid, and then we have dehydration. Everybody's experienced dehydration at some point in their life, I'm certain of it. And dehydration is the loss of water than sodium, more water loss than sodium. And I love this little image right here. So if you lose excessive water through dehydration, sweating, just think of sweating as a form of dehydration. You lose the water through sweating, that means your extracellular fluid osmotic pressure pressure rises because you lost water. And that is going to pull water from the cells to equalize the pressure here. Because water always follows solute concentrations, right? And so then your cells are going to shrink. And this is the problem with dehydration. Your cells shrink and then they can't do their job. This doesn't typically happen too terribly often to anybody to the extent where they end up in the hospital, unless you're an athlete and you're competing in perhaps in a particularly hot environment or humid, really hot and humid environment where you can't literally move that water. Excessive perspiration, that's the one I always think about. Types of diabetes. How could that be?
Makes you pee a lot.
You pee a lot, right? You're polydipsic, polyuric, but you're not the polydipsia, you're not adding water, you just continue to pee. Mm-hmm. Use of diuretics, because that's a great way to lose weight, isn't it?
Sure.
Same idea. Use of diuretics, you're going to pee a lot. If you're not replacing that water, you get dehydrated. Hot and cold weather. Hot weather we understand. What about cold weather though? Wouldn't you think that in cold weather you'd be satisfied? You would be okay?
You start shivering.
You shiver, you're going to generate heat that way. But what happens in cold weather is you actually are still losing water. Remember the water that emanates off you, that transpiration? That's still happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's really cold, all of your blood vessels constrict and all your blood is pulled to the core. And so you can become dehydrated because you're not paying attention because your core is okay. Right? Your heart is okay, your lungs are okay, your intestines are okay, but you're still losing water. And this is really important to keep in mind, that babies and adults both are susceptible to dehydration, but babies are even more susceptible to it because they have a larger surface area to volume, so they can lose more water through the surface than adults do. It's a weird thing to think about, right? Lily has this look of consternation there. Yeah, but this is the case. So babies have less volume to surface, so more transpiration occurring on them than adults, and more urination as well because their kidneys aren't working as well, so they're not able to concentrate urine as well. Oh, and lastly, yes, they have a very high metabolic rate. Kids are burning through their glucose super fast, which is why 2-year-olds can be running around in a t-shirt and shorts on a 40-degree day. You've all experienced that, right? Yeah.
So when you're dehydrated and then you can't quench your thirst, you keep drinking water, is that because it takes 30 minutes for the water to be processed?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then you're like peeing.
Yeah, because
you've overloaded your system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Yeah. Then there's sweating. This is so interesting. We all sweat. We've all sweated plenty. And we know that sweat is produced in sweat glands. We know that from 231. We know all about sweat glands, little clusters of tubules. And how do those sweat glands make sweat? The water has to come from somewhere. And that water actually comes from the circulatory system. So we have a sweat gland that is surrounded by capillaries, and that water is pulled from those capillaries and put into the glands. Where does the water come from for the capillaries? From your interstitial fluid and from the cells. Because ultimately, that water is intracellular. So intracellular fluid satisfies the interstitial fluid into the bloodstream, that bloodstream into the sweat glands and out the ducts and off the surface of your skin. And the value of it, of course, is that when you sweat, you carry away heat. That's why we sweat. This is so interesting to me. Sweat is hypotonic to other extracellular fluids. What's the value of that? Hypotonic, what does hypotonic mean? More water, less solute.
Yeah.
And so if there's more water, less solute, it means that it's not going to draw water from around.
Oh.
Exactly, isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So keep sweating, but keep adding water. Keeps your extracellular fluid volumes in place, keeps your intracellular fluid volume in place, because ultimately that's where the fluid's coming from, all the cells in your body. Because we go back to dehydration. If you lose water from the surface, that water is going to be pulled up from the sweat glands, which is going to pull that water from the blood, which is going to pull that water from interstitial fluid, which is going to pull it from the cells. Water. Water. There's a flip side to the dehydration and the flip side to the hypovolemia and the hypervolemia, and this is called hypotonic hydration. This is rather dangerous when you drink too much water too fast and continue to do it. Now, humans aren't as prone to doing this as dogs are. So if you have a dog and you like to go running with your dog, or you take your dog out on really hot days, you know, dogs cannot perspire anywhere but through the pads of their feet, and they pant. That's how they cool themselves. And when you make a dog really, really, really hot, it's going to come home and it's going to drink and 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 drink, because dogs don't necessarily know when they're supposed to stop, like we're supposed to. But what happens in hypotonic hydration is you take excessive water into your extracellular fluid spaces. Now we have extra water here, and we have a high concentration of solutes here. Where's the water going to go? Into our cells. What happens when we add too much water to our cells? They swell, and then they burst.
They lice?
Hmm?
Can they lice? Lice?
They burst. Yep. And that can happen with this process known as water intoxication, where you drink too much water too fast, too long, too much. You fill up your cells. And this has, of course, tremendous amount to do with the brain, because, you know, your neurons, they're a little delicate, and they're important. And so if you burst your neurons, well, you're in trouble. And that's what happens with dogs too. You get that excessive edema in the brain. Your central nervous system has a hard time functioning with that. Did you hear about who was born in 2000? Anybody alive in 2007 here besides me?
Yeah, I was like two.
Well, yeah, I think everyone in here was alive.
Okay, I just
We were just toddlers.
you're babies. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You said 2000?
2007.
I mean, I was about to.
Sorry.
graduate high school, so-
2007. I meant 2007.
Like 3 years old.
Anyway, there was this interesting radio contest called Hold Your Wee. Have you heard about it?
No.
Yeah, there was a radio contest to hold your wee, which meant don't pee, keep drinking, so you could win a wee,
A wee.
whatever.
Hold
it
your
was.
wee, win a wee.
Win a wee, yeah. And sure enough, one woman did, and she held her wee so long, and then she died.
Oh,
Yeah, because of that contest. That was a big deal.
Did her family sue?
Yes,
Yes.
did they
Oh
win?
my god.
yeah, the whole thing was a nasty, nasty event.
How long did she hold her hand?
And yeah.
Imagine.
Like, how do they determine it? But she was drinking gallons of water. Right?
Drinking,
like, I mean,
drinking,
like, how do they
So
know
did her
if
bladder,
she
like-
peed or not? Like,
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. Plus, I have no idea what a wee is, because,
A Wii U? Is that a game?
yeah,
Game
no,
console.
Yeah.
no, not interested. I'd much rather we play with my horse.
No Super Smash
fine,
Bros?
yeah. Yes,
Back to the water intoxication part, is I remember it was years ago, but it was one of those rat dares, and they had a guy drink gallons of water and
Yep.
killed him,
yes.
trying to get, initiation.
I did hear about that.
Yeah.
Same
This
idea.
year, I can't remember.
I don't remember where, but I remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's so crazy.
I think we're like just the water bowl. That's rounds. Would that be too much
No.
at once?
No. Yeah. So look at this, ADH hypersecretion.
Less official.
You don't even have to do the drinking water part. What if you have ADH hypersecretion? Where you are reabsorbing way too much water. Aldosterone hyposecretion. Aldosterone hyposecretion.
Making
You're not,
aldosterone.
Maintaining
You're not-
electrolytes?
You're not doing naturally retaining your water. This should be hypersecretion.
Yeah.
That should be hypersecretion.
Hyper?
Hyper, because if you have aldosterone hypersecretion, then more sodium and chloride, more water in the system, retaining more water.
Hyper.
Retain more water.
Then the last one of our fluid imbalances is fluid sequestration. You probably are more familiar with it with the term edema,
Yeah.
where you have water sequestered in a particular compartment. This is a classic example of edema in the leg. Little edema in the leg, meaning that your lymphatics aren't capable of moving it all back up into your circulatory system. And we can have edema in the abdomen, known as ascites. This is a really common condition for people with heart disease. If the heart isn't functioning properly, it's not capable of pumping the blood efficiently, then fluid can build up in the abdomen because it's not being taken up by the circulatory system, the lymphatic system, and return to the circulatory system for the heart to send it out again. So ascites is a form of edema, sequestration of fluid in the compartment in the abdomen. Yeah, ascites in the abdominal cavity because of heart disease. So edema can happen anywhere. It can happen to any of you. It can happen if you're sitting for long periods of time. If you have an imbalance, right? You have problems with capillary return, you have problems with your circulatory system, edema or lymphatics can be problematic. You see here, faulty valves can cause it, congestive heart failure because your heart's not working properly, increased blood volume. Why? Because you're not able to move fluids out, increased capillary bed permeability, retaining more water.
Is there a
In a
way to
particular
drain
region.
that fluid? Is there a way to drain that fluid?
Yes, so with somebody with this kind of fluid retention, raise the legs to help the system move that water out. And I don't know if there are drugs. I don't think there would be drugs for that. Diuretics might help, yeah, to keep the fluid going. Okay, that's the first.